Back at you. This is Dr. Chris Zimmer, and I just wanted to recap my last video a little bit and add a few more details. We're coming up on Halloween quick. It's Halloween. Who's that at the door? We've got monsters, ghosts, ghouls, vampires, werewolves. But we have a Levitical law that tells us in 17:10, and whatever man of the house of Israel or of the strangers who dwell among you who eats any blood, I will set my face against that person who eats blood and will cut him off from among his people. So we've got a warning, and it's all about the door. But Jesus stands at the door, and we have in Revelation the letters to the 7 churches. The faithful church gets a message, I know your works. See, I've set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. For you have a little strength, have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Then the lukewarm church gets a message, and the door is mentioned twice. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. So that could be an allusion to the door being offered once and then a second time, sometime during the tribulation, perhaps. The throne room of heaven, this is after the 7 letters. This is immediately after in Revelation 4:1. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. And then this is a voice saying, come up here. And of course, we're looking towards a prototype of the rapture. I just want to recap real quick because there was some question in the comments as to whether it's going to happen this year or not. And I believe we have 4 books in the Bible, 2 in the Old Testament, 2 in the New, that actually tell us it's going to happen this year. And even an allusion in Matthew 24 tells us about the end time. So Tishrei 7, the 7th month, Tishrei the 7th month, the first day. And Psalm 71 talks about that. It's 24 verses. And verses 2 and 4 are tied together by deliver me. It's asking for a rapture or an escape. And so that ties 2, 4 together in 24. And then we also have it mentioned again in verses 20 and 24. Both rapture speak, bring me up again from the depths of the earth. And then in 24, for they are brought to shame who seek my hurt. How are they brought to shame? By the rapture. And then, of course, we looked at 524:24 in a previous video. It's mentioned twice. So if we add 24 days to any 7-1, that's, depending on whatever calendar, doesn't matter. If we add 24 days, we come to 725, which is Harpazo or rapture. Micah 7 is 20 verses. So 7 connected to the first verse, woe is me. They've gathered the summer fruit, so that's rapture speak, 7:1. And then in verse 2, talking about the rapture again, good man has perished out of the earth. 3 is just talking about the evil people that are left behind. And then 4 is, again, about the rapture. The day of thy watchman, thy visitation comes. So we've got 20 verses. Tie that to the 2 and 4. We get 7:1 in 2024. And, of course, we're looking at the Zadok calendar now because other calendar dates have passed for this year. So let's go to the New Testament, John 21. Of course, Jesus is by the Sea of Tiberias, and there are 7 disciples in verse 2. And in verse 4, it's just talking about Jesus, so there's an additional 1. So we have 7:1 in verses 2, 4, 7:1 in 2024, going fishing. And then finally, Luke 17 has a lot going on. I'm just going to say that 2:11 is mentioned 3 times. So we're looking at a robbery, essentially, and we looked at 4 different Strong's words that also talk about robbery before. And I'm not going to talk about the 5/24 date, but there is the 7:1 in 2024. If we look at the last verse, Jesus appointed 70 disciples, and this is apparently who he is speaking to, and he makes the 71st. So we've got 71 or 7:1 in 24 chapters of Luke. 4 times that's mentioned. We've already looked at 3 dates without anything happening. We had 7:1 on the Gregorian, that's July 1st. We had 7-1 on the Hebrew. That's October 3rd. We had 7-1 on the Hebrew calendar. If you consider the new moon sliver, that was October 5th. All three dates didn't pan out, but they gave us some signs, and they also gave us dates to look at with information. And the fourth and the final 7-1 should be October 31st as we use the Zadok calendar, hopefully. And in the last video, I said the fourth time's a charm. And Sister Wendy 2474 says 4 equals open door. That's, of course, Dalet, the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So, yes, we're looking at this door theme. Also, John 6:40 says, I will raise him up at the last day, and October 31st is the last day of the 84-week timeline that started Nisan 1, or March 23rd last year. So I'm not going to go through all this. I did it in the last video. I just wanted to pop this up there and say that we're talking about 3 different calendars, it looks like. The Gregorian or the solar calendar, 365 days, 366 in a leap year. The average is 365.25 days. And then the Hebrew or the lunisolar calendar is 354 days. And the Zadok or the Qumran calendar starts with 360 days. And then we add 4 intercalary days, which separate out all the seasons. And then we add another 7-day intercalary week once every 5 or 6 years in order to keep everything in line so that we have the Sabbath day on the correct day. Many seeing 11:11. This I talked about last time, but I want to add to it a little bit later on. We had 2 11-year-long signs. We had dual conjunctions starting in 2001, which appeared to depict 11:11 in the sky. We had, on the 2024 calendar, 7-1 was the 11th day of summer. 7-1 on the Hebrew was the 11th day of fall, so there's another 11:11. And then we keep seeing 2:11 like we did in Luke. And then lots of incidences of 22, which is 11 plus 11. So this pointed us to 11 days in error if we look at the 2 calendars that are 11 days apart, the Gregorian and the Hebrew. But on the other side, we have the correct Zadok calendar, which was used around the time of Jesus, and in fact, a couple of hundred years before, it looks like, with 11 intercalary days. So the difference between the 2 11 days on the left and the Zadok calendar uses 4 tekufas, or days that separate out the seasons, plus 1 7-day intercalary week. Add them together, 11 days. So we need to use the correct Zadok Qumran calendar. Related background, I'm not going to go through the whole thing here, but we did find some date ranges, analysis that was done from fragments of the Qumran scrolls, and this gives dates, the approximate time the Essenes were writing these things up. And Daniel 7:25, it talks about the Antichrist changing times and laws. In other words, he got us away from that calendar, and now they're using, the Jews are using a lunisolar calendar, which does not give the correct feast days, etc. And Lamech, a little bit of background etymology is uncertain on that, perhaps means strong man or strong youth. And then in Genesis 5:28, we saw Lamech had lived 182 years, and then he had a son, and that was Noah. So this depicts a birth. And then it's also tied to Lamech's total number of years on earth, 777, which means fulfillment. So that birth must be a fulfillment of something. All right, I'm not going to go too in-depth on this because there is actually a correction that helps out and clarifies this a bit, and we'll do that in just a moment. But if you look at half of the 364-day Zadok calendar, then we have half of the year is in symbolic light and half is in symbolic darkness, and that's 182 days apart. And it starts on Passover, month 1, day 14. That's the cross or redemption, and then ends with that birth, like we were talking about with Lamech, or the end of the race, since his name also means strong man. And this ends on Tishrei 1, or month 7, day 1. And that's how the Qumran scrolls were dating things, is by month and day, not by name. Okay, so vernal equinox, we have to throw that in there because that's how they started the year, or they used that as a reference. And the only note I want to make here is that the way we do it now is different than they did in Qumran. So the way our observatories do it, there may be a 8-minute difference because they don't do it at the tip of the sun on the horizon. They do it at the center, or vice versa. So we do need to make a correction for that. And precession of the equinoxes, the sun appears to move backwards through the constellations on the ecliptic. What makes one full rotation every 25,772 years. So we have to correct for that. We found a reference date the last time. We estimated an approximate midpoint for the use of the Essene calendar. And from the paleographic dating and the Essenes flourishing 2nd century to 1st century BCE, we found a mixed range, or an adjusted dating range, of 200 BCE to 50 CE. If we take the average of that, we get 125 BCE, which also is reminiscent of the 125-degree angle that we found, edge angle that we found from Revelation and New Jerusalem City, but it also talks about Revelation, or it speaks to Revelation 12:5, where the child is caught up to God and to his throne. So we've got that 125 significance there, but it's also the difference between the average solar year and the Zadok calendar year. 365.25 minus 364 is 1.25 days. So this seems to give us two witnesses to that year, 125 BCE, that we need to use that for our reference. So if we do that, and there's a little bit more information even than that, but if we look at the vernal equinox on 323, 125 BCE, it happens at 1741. But there's also an 11-11 configuration. And if you look at the sun is actually part of it in this place. So we have an 11-11 alluding to that in the sky, but there are only 4 objects, and 4 objects may be pointing to the 4 feast days that are about to be fulfilled when Jesus is born and lives his life here on earth. And if you look at the 11-11s that happened since, 2001, you have 11-11 with the sun in the center. So there are actually 5 objects, which alludes to the 5th feast, or trumpets, being fulfilled shortly. So if we take that same ecliptic longitude, J2000, and we place it this year, then we get a vernal equinox of 4/19/2024 at 13:43:50. So we've actually placed the sun at the position it was in 125 BCE, only this year, to get a vernal equinox to make calculations off of. And if we take, just for a side note, if we take the supergalactic longitude, which is not quite as accurate, but it's very, very close, there seems to be a message here. And this is at a time of, on that date, 4/19, at a time of 18:059. So it looks like we can index it or increment it 1 more second. And if we do that, we actually get a message here. Oops, went backwards. There we go. Get 1810, and in Strong's 1810 is suddenly, and it's used 5 times, and 5, of course, alludes to the 5th feast, or trumpets. Then, if we look at the vernal equinox in 251, which is kind of a variation on 125, I did this quite by accident, but we come up with a date of 325 on 251 BCE at 5:10:31. So it seems to give us 325, a message in Strong's of deliver, and also a 5 for the 5th feast, or trumpets, being fulfilled, and then even a date, 10:31, so it seems to be pointing towards Halloween. Okay, so this is actually the final clue, I think, for the 11-11. And if we look at 11 intercalary days on the left-hand side, which would be pointed at 125 BCE, because we actually did see an 11-11 that year, but only with 4 objects. And then on the right-hand side, we've got an 11 intercalary days again for 2024, and we saw an 11-11 this year with the sun in the center, with 5 objects. Okay, so why is this important? Because we were 14 days off, right? We're looking at the date of the cross, right? And then counting 182 days until the birth, so half a year. But we've moved 14 days. We need justification to do that. And what is the only way that we can do that on the Zadok calendar? What is the only way that we can shift the first day of the year by 14 days? And that's by using 2 intercalary 7-day weeks. And we're justified in doing that because we need to correct 125 BCE, and we're even told so in the sky, and again in the sky for 2024. So we need to add 2 7-day intercalary weeks, totaling 14 days. There's our justification for doing that by the Zadok rules. And the Zadok calendar, again, had 4 tekufas, which are 4 days that are intercalary. You add those to the 360 to get a 364-day year. And those 4 days separate out the seasons. And then, once every 5 or 6 years, you add a 7-day intercalary week to make 11 additional days. So here it is. This is the actual justification in doing it by the way the Qumran calendar should be correctly calculated, by adding 2 7-day intercalary weeks, one for 125 BCE and another for 2024. So we need 2 intercalary 7-day weeks. So if we crunch the numbers, considering that, we started off with the ecliptic longitude from our reference back in 125 BCE, and then we corrected that to this year, which gave us 419 at that time, 1343.50. And so we need to correct 30 days, 8 hours, 37 minutes, and 50 seconds. That's the difference in the vernal equinoxes between 125 and 2024. And that's due to precession. Now, that's from Jerusalem. If we change the location to Mazatlan, because this is where we're doing all our calculations from. This is where we were given the time of 8:53 a.m. So if we take the 3:9, this is doing a correct way now. I'm going to show you an incorrect way to do it. 3:19 VE is the vernal equinox plus 1 day. That's the first Wednesday after the vernal equinox. Takes us to 3:20:24. That's the apparent Zadok New Year, where we added the correction. Or, I'm sorry, if we add the correction, then we come to that 4:19:24 at 8:37:50 a.m. MST, and that becomes month 1, day 1, the adjusted Zadok New Year. So if we backdate 1 day, because we want to start counting from the last day of the previous year, right? So 419, if that's month 1, day 1, then 418 would be the last day of the previous year. Then we can add 14 days. There's our 2 intercalary weeks. And we come to 5/2/24 at 8:37:50, and that's month 1, day 14, or Passover. But we're going to adjust that, and we're going to call it month 1, day 1 now, because we've correctly counted the calendar and we've correctly intercalated 2 7-day intercalary weeks. So now we've got the correct month 1, day 1 of the new Zadok year, 5/2/24 at that time. Now if we take that and add 182 days, that should take us to month 7, day 1, which is October 31st, 2024 at 8:37:50 a.m. If we add 16 minutes, because we did the correction twice for the vernal equinox, then we come up with October 31st, 2024 at the correct time, 8:53:50 a.m. MST. Okay, so that is Tishrei 1. That's the date we want. Now, if we do this in an incorrect way, if we do it out of order, you can do it that way by mistake, then we would take 319, the vernal equinox, and PDT, let's see, we would add that correction to it. and we come to 4:19:24. We've had the wrong time now, 4:43:50. And in other words, we're adding the correction before we calculate the first Wednesday after the VE. So now we've got 4:19 plus 5 days we have to add because that's the first Wednesday after VE. So now we end up at 4:24:24 at the wrong time, 4:43. So taking that, 4:24 now becomes our first day. We have to add 13 days to take us to that month 1, day 14, is 5/7. Now we're way far ahead on 4:43, again, the wrong time. And if we take that 5/7 and add the 182 days, we come to November 5th. Now we're way past the end of October, and we're at the wrong time. Add 16-minute correction for the VE, which was observed twice. Then we come to November 5th at 4:59:50 a.m. Okay, so we've got 2 times. One calculated correctly, October 31st, and then the other incorrectly, and we get November 5th. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because it seems our Father has added in a fail-safe of some sort, or so it seems. If we look at the timeline and we look at the 2 dates that we just calculated, October 31st and 11/5, the 84 weeks takes us to October 31st, or 588 days, and G588 is accept. So in other words, he's telling us that we should accept that date. But if we count to 11/5 incorrectly, we get 593 days, which means reject. So he literally put a fail-safe in here that tells us if you found October 31st, accept that date. If you found November 5th, you're going down the wrong track. Reject that date. Isn't that interesting? Then also, since we were speaking of Lamech, who is running like a strong man running a race, right? If you count 408 days from that day last year, 919, where we had the 2 signs, the birth of the child and the head being joined together to the body, then you get 408 days, of course, to October 31st, and that's Andronicus, or man of victory. So we see that strong man has victory on October 31st. So these are good signs. It tells us to accept one date, October 31st, reject November 5th. That's not right. And then if you count from the birth of the child, the head being joined to the body, 408 days to October 31st, that man is victorious. So we're getting even more good signs that are pointing towards Halloween. Now, again, from last time we looked at, this has all been hidden or kept secret. These are secrets. If you count from Nisan 1 last year to 11/26, that's 614 days, and that means hid or kept secret. And then the day after, 11/27, says kill. So it's as if, the 27 is an important number, 20, 27 perhaps. The middle of the tribulation, perhaps that's the start of the Great Tribulation. I don't know. I haven't researched that much, but it would seem to be pointing towards that. And also, if you break up 47 days from the birth of that comet on 10/11 to 11/27, you'll get a 20 if you go to October 31st, and then a 27 if you take it all the way to the end, 2027. So I don't know. Perhaps there's something there. I'm not really that concerned. I want to know the date of the rapture. As many of you do, we want to know when we get to go. Anyway, that seems to take us through the last part of this timeline that gives us some calendar acrostics and telling us that Satan is robbed again. Okay, and here is just the November calendar. I'm not going to go in detail, but we had, I believe it's 6 acrostics. We have 3 on the Gregorian and 3 on the Hebrew. So there's that 33, like the age where Jesus died, buried, and resurrected and ascended into heaven. And we also have the the four words that mean robbery, right? G 724 through 727. And then we have the acrostic is 4567, which is Satan. So Satan is being robbed. And we also have 20 days between the Hebrew calendar from the first acrostic to the last to the robbery. And then we also have 20 days from the Gregorian acrostic to the last Gregorian acrostic. So two instances of 20, which seem to point to that precessional drift, asking us to couple them together and say 2030, which could be the return of Christ. Okay, so the difference between the time of 8:53:50 that we just calculated and that we reported previously, 8:53:23, is 27 seconds. And there's that last 27 days or so on the November calendar where the acrostic shows up. So I believe this corresponds to that secret message, and also to we see the comet doing some special things during those 27 days. That's Qumran Atlas, which means Purple Mountain, and of course an atlas is maps of the earth over the 27 days which follow the October 31st rapture. And now there's another comet that's in the mix. So let's go back to what we looked at last time real quick. On 1010, the comet Purple Mountain Atlas is about to be birthed, and if we actually set it in motion, we can see the tail start to disappear as it goes through Ophiuchus and serpents. Serpent being restrained, it gets dimmer and dimmer until finally it's completely invisible to the naked eye, and it winds up under the wing of Achaia, the eagle. And of course, eagle is a symbology for God, so we're with God at that point. Okay, but there's more. There's another comet coming up. And Hydra, the serpent, is involved in one of the constellations that it goes through, Crater, the cup, and Corvus, the raven. And I'll read you from E.W. Bullinger just a little bit. The time has at length come for the fulfillment of the many prophecies pictured in the heavens. And in its three constellations we see the consummation of them all in the complete destruction of the old serpent and all his seed and all his works. It is the special work of the Messiah as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and he's above that serpent, he's above Hydra in Leo the lion, to trample it underfoot. It is pictured as the female serpent Hydra, the mother of all and author of all evil. Hydra has the significant meaning he is abhorred. So we have two instances in Revelation. One talks about the cup of divine wrath poured out upon him, and that's the third angel. Says in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image, receives its mark on their forehead or on the hand too, they too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured out full strength into the cup of his wrath. So there's the talk about the cup, and then which is near to the Hydra, and the birds of prey devouring the serpent, which is in Revelation 19. And I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in midair, come together, for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals, and so on. So we have this bird imagery from the raven or from Corvus. And those three seem to be the last in the story. Those seem to be of course, the final destruction of the serpent. Excuse me. All right. So here we can see both together. In the red reticule, you can see the C2024S1 Atlas, and then on the kind of left of center, you can see Qumran, Purple Mountain, and Atlas. And an atlas, of course, is a number of different types of maps. If you look at an atlas, you'll see, geographic maps. You'll see maps of crops all over the world. You'll see population distribution all around the world. So this, and I think in effect, that's really what this is speaking to, is an atlas of population distribution around the world, because Purple Mountain is associated with us. This, I believe, speaks to the church. So we have one comet that's telling a story about what happens to the church. We get taken up and we wind up under the eagle's wing. And then the other one, C2024 S1 Atlas, is simply a map of the earth, and the purple mountain is absent. So two different stories here. So we can see in the red reticule going through Hydra, then through Crater the Cup, then through Corvus the Raven. It whips around the sun, and then it makes its way back through Hydra, and it's on the way to Argo, the ship. Takes a little while to get there. We're in December now, and it's coming up on the galactic alignment, which happens on 12/21 this year, and it's in Argo, the ship. And this is the actual galactic alignment on 12/21, happens at 2010. And if we look at the Hebrew, this is kind of interesting. Strong's Hebrew 2010 is release, or a day of rest or holiday. And that is apparently what we are supposed to see as the church, or the purple mountain. We're supposed to see rest once the rapture happens. But I don't think that happens for this particular group. Anyway, Nishimura was also in Argo, the ship, on 12/21. Will also be on 12/21/2024 this year. So should see both comets there. But our modeling software sometimes lies to us. It doesn't tell us exactly what will happen. And there's a story, watch Comet Atlas burn up as it flies into the sun. So this particular one never made it to Argo, the ship. Comet C2024 S1 Atlas is no more. On Monday, October 28th, the comet evaporated as it was heading towards perihelion, the closest point to the sun in its orbit. There were earlier hopes that the comet officially designated C2024 S1 Atlas could become a Halloween treat, visible to the naked eye, but these were ultimately just wishful thinking. Astronomers had already begun observing the cosmic snowball beginning to disintegrate earlier this month. So it disappears by approximately 8 UTC, that's 1 a.m. PDT MST, on 10/28/24. And this was nicknamed the Halloween Comet, but it burns up 3 days before Halloween. Okay, so departing from that, here's something different that happened around the same time. This was on November 1st, or actually will happen, hasn't happened yet. But the moon will come into conjunction with the sun, and as observed from Mazatlan, it happens at 444. Strong's 444 is man, usage as a human being, whether male or female. But if we change locations, if we go to Jerusalem, it happens at a time of 1553, which means be absent or depart. So this seems to be talking about the rapture. This seems to be saying man is going to be absent, or he will have departed on November 1st. And of course, that would be the second day that the rapture would happen in the world, should it happen on Halloween. So it would happen on 11/1 on the other side of the international date line, like in Tokyo, Japan, or anywhere in that area, immediate area. Also, Mexico City announces the date of the 2024 Day of the Dead Parade. And this is scheduled for November 2nd at 2 p.m. There's that 2-2. And that's, of course, the last chapter, last book of the Bible, 22, which is a description of heaven. So by this point in time, on November 2nd, we should be, if everything goes well, God willing, in heaven. The parade will depart from Mexico City's Puerta de los Leones, finally arriving at the capital's main square, the Zocalo. So this speaks about the Day of the Dead, or Dia de Muertos, follows the pre-Columbian indigenous belief that the dead temporarily return to Earth between November 1st and 2nd. So they actually have since they're following, I guess, doctrines of demons, they actually have it backwards. They have the dead returning to Earth. The dead should be going to heaven. If we do indeed have the rapture, the dead will be raised first, and then we follow. So I thought this was kind of interesting. I threw it in there. And then finally, we're still going with the same timeline. It looks like we should have Rapture on 1031 this year, because we have 4 books in the Bible that point us to that date this year. We just had the monumental task of trying to figure out when Tishrei 1 was, and I believe we finally found it through the Qumran calendar. So I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope to see you in the sky. God bless.